welcome to a new episode of Hello World. So Peter, what's the topic of today?
Well, we in the IT industry, we talk a lot about transformation, primarily digital transformation. And we see that as a great challenge to transform companies, to transform organizations and implement digital solutions that will help companies in different ways to transform and improve. And today we're going to talk about transformation, but not only from a digital point of view, from a society point of view. Very interesting. We have a guest that has been working with developing countries for over 40 years, helping them to transform from an economic and social perspective.
Yeah, so today we're meeting Alphons, who has been working within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Netherlands his whole life. So he's been based in Tanzania and South Korea and been the ambassador, for example, in Addis Ababa, Burkina Faso, Bangladesh, Rwanda, and Uganda. So in many developing countries. So it will be very interesting to hear his experiences from there. So welcome to the show, Alphons.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much. Happy to be there.
Great. So, the objective for developing countries has been to undergo transformation, a social and economic transformation. Could you give us some example of successful transformations?
Yes, I can, but I just want to go back a little bit into history when it comes to the transformation and the way that countries have worked together in order to materialize that transformation. Around 1944, we started meeting in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, where leaders from the Western world were gathering and discussing issues that could resolve the disastrous position that Europe had at that time because of the Second World War. And in 1944, it was decided at the Bretton Woods Conference to establish the World Bank, the IMF, and International Trade Organization. And the World Bank and the IMF were instrumental in challenging the enormous aid that was given to Europe in 1947 onwards through the Marshall Aid. The Americans provided financial aid to Europe in order to rebuild its infrastructure. And we saw after Europe used that money, many countries in Europe used the Marshall Aid successfully so that they could rebuild their society. They looked at we approached the 60s. In the 60s we see the enormous wave of countries getting independence mainly from Britain and France. And the international community, the Western world, was looking at ways and means to support the newly independent countries. They were the ex-colonies, so they would provide financial aid and technical aid to the ex-colonies. And also, we saw after the Second World War, we saw the world divided into the Eastern Bloc, the Communist Bloc, and the Capitalist Bloc. And providing assistance to countries, to developing countries, was also very much politically motivated. It was buying your allies. It was not so much looking at the specific needs, but it was very much making sure that the newly independent countries became part of your system, either the communist system or the Western world. So the aid was very much looked upon as an instrument that would serve political interests. We saw also at the same time, we saw two different regions. We saw East Asia in the 50s and the 60s, and we saw Africa. And if we compare the two, then we saw East Asia was very much a basket case. East Asia was suffering under civil wars in Indonesia, in Malaysia. There was a tremendous famine in India. We saw the war on the Korean Peninsula. In other words, the perspectives for East Asia were rather bleak in comparison to Africa, that when the African countries became independent, it was rather stable. It was not so much political unrest. What we see, however, in 2020 is that East Asia has emerged. The Asian tigers have emerged. We see countries like South Korea, like Taiwan, China, of course, very important to mention. We see India now being really a world power, contrary to Africa, where we see many countries that are worse off now than they were 60, 70 years ago. Later on, one saw in the discussions with the recipient countries, one said, well, you have to look at the gender issues because half of the population are women and they have to have a more equal place into the society in order to include them in the productive areas of the country. After the gender, we had the emphasis on the AIDS, we had the emphasis on the environment, we have the emphasis on climate change, etc. So we had in the discussions between the donors, the Western donors and the recipients, we have seen an array of different subjects that were preeminent for a certain period. Not looking really at the definite needs, but identifying what we thought would be the best approach in order to assist countries to make a successful transition. Next to it, we have to realize that in the whole discussions on the transitions, we have many players. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the aid to Africa has not resulted in this transformation. And I can now quote President Kagame from Rwanda, who gave an interview with Time magazine in September 2007. And he says, now, the question comes from our donors and partners, having spent so much money, what difference did it make? In the last 50 years, you've spent over 400 billion in aid to Africa, but what is there to show for it? And the donor should ask, what are we doing wrong? Or what are the people we are helping doing wrong? Obviously, somebody's not getting something right. Otherwise, you'd have something to show for your money. The donors also have made a lot of mistakes. Many times they have assumed that they are the ones who know what countries in Africa need. They want to be the ones to choose where to put the money, to be the ones to run it without any accountability. In other cases, they have simply associated with the wrong people and money gets lost and ends up in the people's pocket. We should correct that. That is what Paul Kagame said in 2007. We see indeed the link between the accountability and the accountability from the countries towards the donor community and not so much towards their own population, because the money that's coming into the country, the money that is given to the government is not coming from its citizens through the tax system, but mainly through the foreign donors. In other words, the countries are not accountable, or the governments are not accountable to their citizens, but much more to the donor community. It's also called the externalization of accountability.
So you're painting quite a complex political and environment to be active in, of course, and where you have to take a lot of considerations to many wills and agendas, basically. But when we talked, you were mentioning there are still some areas where you can see that you've succeeded. And I think you mentioned Rwanda as one of the countries where you actually seen positive effects and so on. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I can. Rwanda is a very special country. So in '94, we saw this horrific genocide where just about 1 million people were being killed in 3 months' time. So we had, as the foreign minister of Rwanda told me, they had 3 9/11s per day for 100 days. And these people were that mainly the Tutsis were being killed, not in the night, not by soldiers, but by their fellow citizens, by their neighbors, even by their friends, so-called friends and family. So we saw in 100 days' time, we saw a complete destruction from the socio-economic framework in Rwanda. People had fled or people were being killed, but nothing was functioning anymore. The government wasn't functioning, the infrastructure was being destroyed, the schools were not functioning, the hospitals were not functioning. It was a complete disaster. And from that time, from 1994, the government that came into power, the Rwanda, the rebel forces that came from Uganda into Rwanda, they had an uphill task to recreate their country that was utterly destroyed. They had to recreate the physical infrastructure, and they had to recreate the society infrastructure as such. They need to establish the schools, the hospitals. They need to set up the complete government, and they had to take into consideration that there should not be hatred killings. There should not be continuous revenge. They should stop they had to stop the civil war. So they created a system of reconciliation. It's not a legal system. It's called gacaca, and where the culprits had to ask officially for forgiveness. The government is not shy of taking very drastic measures when it comes to, for example, banning of plastic bags. As you are aware, when you travel around the world, the plastic bags that are being used to pack in everything is incredible and causes enormous pollution. When I lived in Rwanda, the president of the government, I must say, decided from one day to another, plastic bags are not allowed in the country anymore. We have to use the natural fibers to pack in our groceries. So if you go now by KLM from Amsterdam to Kigali, and you have the bag from Schiphol with you, sea by fly, then you are being told to leave that plastic sea by fly bag in the plane, because it will be taken from you if you take it outside of the plane.
That's interesting.
So the key word is really, when it comes to transformation, it's political will and translating the political will in clear programs. We saw that in Rwanda. We saw that also very clearly in Korea. That also started in the 50s with the war on the Korean Peninsula, and the division of the country, the industrialized North and the agricultural South, that had to also transform itself. And we see also in South Korea a very clear program on socioeconomic development, that so-called Semmerundong.
Yeah, I think you were telling us when we talked to you as well that the importance of actually listening and studying the people, and not just taking our ideas and implementing them onto Africa or onto a country, but without understanding really the society and the culture, nature and the relationships between people and so on. So the need of actually understanding and observing first, maybe before you actually introduce something new to help.
Yeah, as I just quoted President Kagame, who also said very clearly, where did it go wrong? And one of the issues that he mentioned was indeed that the donors decide what program should be financed by the donor community, not really looking at the local structures, not looking at the way things were organized before the colonial period, for example.
So, Alphons, what has been the role of technology and innovation in the transformation of the developing countries?
When it comes to technology, an issue that might be of interest to you. When we look at the transformation, a very, very important role was played by the transistor radio. And I'm talking about the my experiences in West Africa, not so densely populated, where I lived in Burkina Faso and in Niger. There you saw the impact from the transistor radio that enlarged the horizon from the people tremendously. Normally speaking, when you live in a village, you have an horizon of about 25 kilometers. That's the distance what you walk on a day back and forth to your home. By introducing the transistor radio, you suddenly had information from villages 100 miles away or 200 miles away. So it enlarged your program, it enlarged your horizon. Also, it provided you with information that you previously didn't have. An enormous impact on the daily life was the transistor radio, which you don't think immediately of.
No.
If you look now, technical innovation, of course, now we see the use of the iPhone. We see the use of the iPhone in the most rural areas of Africa. iPhone not only for talking, but mainly also using for remote banking. But the point is that these innovations are not local innovations. Those are introduced innovations. I think that is something which we surely see lacking in Africa, is indeed investing in innovation. Still being very basic, investing in agriculture and making sure that you have something to eat. That brings me to another topic which I would like to raise, and that's the issue that's often asked: is the world able to feed itself because of the enormous population growth? Specifically now, when we look at the developing countries, when we look at Africa, which is where more than half of the population is under 15 years old, and which gives an enormous pressure naturally on the societies and on the communities. In the discussion, will the world be able to feed itself? I think that it still is able to feed itself if we take into consideration that from the agricultural produce in many developing countries, more than half get lost because of post-harvest losses, because of lack of storage. There's no infrastructure to storage, so you have to bring the produce straight to the market. And as you all know, fresh fruit, when it comes to fruit and vegetables, they spoil within a couple of days, especially in warmer climates. Up to half of what's being produced is being spoiled in that way. And if you look at the developed world, where we destroy a lot of food on a daily basis because of the fact that we have an overproduction. So those are issues that
still remain to be resolved. And maybe innovation and technology can help in that area too going forward, whether it's people bringing technology to Africa, or if we can manage to increase education level and so on, and start getting innovation from within as well, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. It's been very, very interesting to listen to your experience. It's almost mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot for being part of this webcast.
Thank you very much, Alphons. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be part of the Hello World, and I wish you all the success in your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well,
talk about transformation. And challenges.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting that we see that, although we didn't go into detail, maybe it's still about understanding what is it your user wants to do, what is it where is their actual needs, what are their actual pains, so that we make sure that we're actually solving important problems. Because I think we see, if we look at the corporate world, I think we see a lot of innovation and new products coming in that are actually not flying because we've not done that research either. And looking at this scale, it's obviously has even more more impact, of course, that you're not
Yes,
doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's mind blowing that this is affecting a lot of people. It has affected a lot of people, of course, and it's really very interesting to listen about these stories. But I agree. The challenges with transition is very similar, even though it's a micro or
macro level.
level.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, thank you for today, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you will see the next episodes coming in. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Bye bye.